Hi everyone, it's Tiba from Wiser Humans, and I'm here today with Carey Kirk, who is a psychological counselor at the same practice that we share called Lausanne Therapy Space. And Carey is, among other things, trained as in suicide risk and risk assessment and prevention. And she's been working in the field for over 10 years. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk to her today and talk about a subject that we don't touch on very much, which is suicidal thoughts and risk of suicide during this time. So thank you, Carey, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So could you start just by telling us a little bit about how is this period with the pandemic putting people at an increased risk of suicidal thoughts, self-harm, attempts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so one of the things that people may or may not know is that suicide is actually listed as the leading cause of death in Switzerland for people ages 15 to 30. And so we're talking kind of young adults. It's the number 2 leading cause of death with this age group globally, but in Switzerland in particular, it's the first listed cause of death. And so it's quite serious to begin with, but then with the situation with the coronavirus, us going into lockdown, society really changing very quickly and shutting down, there are a lot more elevated risk factors in our environment at the moment, things like social isolation and loneliness. A lot more of that with people spending weeks at a time by themselves. Maybe not, being cut off from family who might be living in other countries. And so there's the added stress of that as well. So increased levels of stress and anxiety about maybe their own health situation, especially if they've got pre-existing conditions related to respiratory disorders or issues, cancer, any other health diagnosis that puts them maybe at higher risk for the coronavirus. Also, we've got people kind of sheltering away, in lockdown away from their families. So there's an added stress there, but sometimes they're with their families, which can also be an added stress.
Yes.
Because not everybody gets along, and not necessarily with their families, but maybe also a roommate situation or a partner situation that isn't the best or wasn't the best. And so a lot of times what we find is that some people cope with their living situations by typically being outside of them.
Yeah.
And only really going back in when they have to. But at the moment, what we're seeing is a lot of people stuck together in very close proximity for much more extended periods of time. And so for people whose coping skills have been to leave and go other places or to be out in public, that's a coping skill that's been pretty much almost removed from people's lives. Things like financial concerns can be a huge risk factor for having suicidal thoughts. And so with everything shutting down, some people, and luckily the Swiss government has been offering kind of packages or trying to secure some salaries, but maybe a lot of people in things like retail industries are experiencing a huge change in their work environments, in the hours that they're able to work, and then the pay they're able to receive.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that filing for unemployment went up quite a lot during this lockdown period. And so financial concerns can be a significant trigger. Also things with decreased social support. So we're talking about isolation and loneliness. Social support is huge when we're feeling depressed or feeling alone. And it can feel more difficult to reach out or to feel like there's people around you that are there to support you or can help you, especially if you're isolating or in lockdown at home by yourself. or with people with whom you have a conflicted relationship with. And then another one can also be our routines have been significantly disrupted. I mean, we're now in, almost 2 months from when all of the lockdown measures started to be put in place. But we're living incredibly different lives in a lot of ways to what we used to.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's routines of like, okay, just get up, take a shower, get out the door, travel to work, come, it keeps people going.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has been taken away. We typically recommend, still follow a routine while you're at home, still get up, still take a shower, still get dressed as if you were going to go out. But that's not being forced upon us anymore.
Yes.
It's an extra effort that we have to make in order to put routines in place, which can be harder.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of absence of that can also create environments where people can feel more depressed, can feel more anxious, and might experience more suicidal thoughts.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm wondering, could you give us a few examples of what suicidal thoughts sound like?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So suicidal thoughts can come in a lot of different forms. So we've got what we call passive suicidal ideations, which can be thoughts like, I wish I didn't wake up in the morning, or I just wish this would all stop, or the world would probably be better off without me.
Yeah.
So in those kinds of thoughts, we're not directly saying anything about death per se, but it's just more of this almost like wishful thinking going in that direction of it would be so much easier if I weren't alive or I weren't doing this.
Yeah.
And these kind of suicidal thoughts can kind of slip under the radar. They're much harder for people to notice. Like when it comes to noticing your friends maybe having, or family members having things like this, but also noticing ourselves. Like we might, because it's not about death per se, it's easier for us to not really notice, oh, I'm actually starting to have suicidal thoughts. And this indicates that I really need some support, or I need to get some help or do something about this.
Mm-hmm.
So there's passive suicidal ideations, and then there's active suicidal ideations. So active thoughts come more in the form of like, oh, I wish I was dead, or I really don't want to live my life anymore, and I think I would be better off dead. And then sometimes even then thinking about how would a person do that, and maybe even to the extent, in a very severe end of the spectrum, starting to formulate plans or starting to kind of think about how would they end their lives.
Mm-hmm. And I know this sounds like a weird question, but what would you say is the function of these thoughts? Like, why do we have, as humans, suicidal thoughts?
That's a really good question. I think that they can come up in a lot of different ways. One of the ways that they can emerge is as an escape, as a way to say, as a way to almost like gain a little bit more control back in our lives. And this is something that I've noticed come up a number of times during this kind of restricted period, is people having a sense of control being taken away from them in their lives, or we don't have the option to go to the movies or to go out. We're being told to not spend time in large groups. We're being told kind of where we can go almost and what we need to do. And there's a lot more control being placed upon us. And so sometimes we can feel like that's not tolerable, and it's really scary to feel like we don't have as much choice in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes suicidal thoughts can come up as a sense of like, oh, this is one thing I can do, this is something I have control over, like this is how I can influence my life, even though it's a very extreme way.
Mm-hmm.
that our minds can choose to do that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be almost like this kind of control reflex. Other reasons, a lot of times it's because we are very depressed. And we might not have noticed that, especially if we're in isolation. It's harder to notice kind of subtle shifts in ourselves when we're alone and we don't have anybody to say, you know, hey, you don't look like you're doing so good, or, you know, hey, I've been noticing this about you. Because we tend to kind of experience ourselves, you know, very subtly, incrementally. We don't necessarily notice all the shifts downwards that we might make. And so when we're depressed and when we're very severely depressed, our brains stop working the way that they typically would. The regular survival instinct that we have inside of ourselves might not be functioning properly. And so then we might have thoughts of suicidal ideations as a symptom that we're really not doing very well. And we need to get support. We need to reach out for help in some capacity. And so in that sense, suicidal thoughts can be kind of like a fever, you know, as a symptom of having the flu. Or the coronavirus at the moment. But, you know, suicidal thoughts are also a symptom sometimes that we're struggling with depression. And so they don't necessarily mean that we want to kill ourselves or that we want to end our lives. They can just mean that we're really struggling at the moment and we need help.
I would add maybe also that as a symptom, and maybe also sometimes as the solution to end suffering. Like the way that the human mind works is that we want to avoid suffering as much as possible. And this can, and even thinking about it, not even having a plan, but just those kind of thoughts, the more passive ones that you mentioned, can be a way for the mind to get back that sense of control, and also to feel like this is a solution to my suffering. That
like this gives me an option, you know, that's part of our, like everything else, all the control is being taken away. And so this is one thing that I can still think about, that I've got control of. And when we feel like we've got some areas of control in our life, that can bring us a bit of a sense of relief. And again, it doesn't mean that we actually want to end our lives or that we're going to. It can just be that, that these thoughts have different types of mechanisms.
And I would always say also that it's a part of us that wants that, not all of us, because often when we have these kind of thoughts, it really freaks us out, and they're really common. I think they're so much more common than we talk about. We never really talk about this with our friends, but I think most of us have had these kind of passive thoughts, at least at some point. You know, what's, or even living, or you know. I wish I was never born, you know, those kind of thoughts. They're really quite common, and they can be a way of trying to get back that sense of I'm finding a solution to my suffering, or
that sense of control. Absolutely. And I absolutely agree when you're talking about kind of like just a part of ourselves, because you know, when we have suicidal thoughts and then we have that response of like, oh my goodness, what is this? You know, very indicative of like there's other parts of us that don't have those feelings, you know, that have other kind of lines of thought. It's really important to try to keep that perspective.
So what would you recommend to someone who's really struggling at the moment with, you know, with suicidal thoughts? What help is out there? What can they do?
I mean, luckily things are starting to open back up again at this point in time. But, you know, the social distancing, I think that's a terrible term, you know, of like the physical distancing measures, you know, are still in place. We want to be socially close to each other, but physically slightly more apart. But, you know, while that's going on, we still have kind of limited access to maybe all our coping resources. We can't, you know, spend tons of time away from our families. We can't necessarily go into work, although I know some workplaces are are starting up again or looking to do that. So things that we can do maybe more internally focusing on ourselves can be some of the mindfulness apps that are out there. So, practicing or trying to get into some form of meditation or some deep breathing, giving yourself a bit of space to practice creating a bit more of a separation between your thoughts and yourself. And that's one of the things that mindfulness is a really useful practice for. We can have a little bit more distance to go, okay, I am not my suicidal thoughts, and I can still live my life and exist while I have thoughts like this come up. If that's something that happens for people or is going on a more regular basis. Things like doing activities that can hopefully change our physical state. So just give us a bit of a jolt. So doing some exercise at home if you can, if you've got the space. And yoga can be a really great exercise to do at home because it requires the space of like a hallway, or a small segment of a bedroom, and can also be really intense. Depending on what you're doing. And there's a lot of places at the moment that are doing like online yoga classes or Zoom yoga classes or things like that. So if people have got, access to the internet in a small area where they could even just put a towel on the floor, that could be something just to get them into a different physical state. Things like any sort of distraction skills. So it can be things like doing a hobby, like knitting or painting or drawing. I know a lot of people who have gotten into a lot more creative pursuits, either for the first time or really going back to them because of this quarantine period. Anything that will really kind of engage your mind, like maybe it is learning a new skill, and we've been inundated by kind of emails from courses going, learn this, learn that, do this. And I don't think that kind of inundating ourselves and learning things kind of like all the time is necessarily like the greatest thing to do. I think we need time for reflection as well. But if you need to distract yourself away from thoughts, online courses or learning something can be a really great way to do that. And just try to avoid things that will make you feel worse. And so, try not to distract yourself by maybe going on a lot of social media. Because then we can see different stories and different viral videos about the situation. Or the news. Probably, try not to distract yourself by watching or reading about the news. Especially if you're already in a mental state that feels more distressed. But maybe doing something like self-soothing skills. So we can focus on our five senses and try to use our senses to seek comfort in our environment. So things like our sense of touch can be used for soft things like soft rugs to walk on or to sit with. Like I'm actually like this chair I'm sitting on has got like one of those IKEA sheepskin rugs on it. It's a little cold in this basement room, but it's kind of nice and soft.
It makes a
or
difference.
taking warm showers or baths. Can be another way to kind of use the skill of touch. Doing things, being around things that smell really good, like maybe baking something is also a distraction skill, plus a nice smell and a taste as well.
I have been baking a lot. There's something really soothing about all of it, the act of doing it, and then the smell and the taste.
I've gotten into like a weekly pancake day. It's been quite fun as well. It's distracting. You're like, okay, where are all my ingredients? You put it together, you get kind of like nice smells, and then also you get to eat it afterwards. So trying to find just really simple things.
When
we think about it,
I mean, I would say it's often a lot like a collection of simple things that make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be like one big thing.
Nope.
It's really all those small things adding up over the day. And I would
Yes.
also add just taking one day at a time. Because it's
Absolutely.
so easy
Absolutely.
right now to get caught up in the what ifs and all the uncertainty, and
Yeah.
that feels so overwhelming because nobody knows, none of us
Yeah.
know what's
We're
happening.
sitting with unprecedented amounts of uncertainty in our
Yeah.
life at the moment on so many different levels. And for some people who are already maybe going through lots of things related to uncertainty, like maybe they're in new jobs, or maybe they're not sure about their job situation, or maybe they're dealing with a health situation that brought a lot of uncertainty into their lives anyway, or um, the people that have recently moved to Switzerland and are trying to adjust to life in a new country. And then we
Mm.
get the situation related to the coronavirus put on top of all of that, which means that some of the things in society that we thought were a little bit more certain, that we thought were a little bit more tangible things that we could hold on to, have also been shifted away from us.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's, unprecedented levels of uncertainty that can really raise our anxiety and
Mm.
make it even more important for us to try to ground ourselves as much as possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the moment, like using our senses, using some mindfulness time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I think also it's important to know that in Switzerland, the suicide hotlines are still working.
Yes.
And you can also reach out for help, with
Mm-hmm.
therapists. Even general doctors are able to prescribe antidepressants or
Yes.
to refer you to people. So there's help out there, even
Mm-hmm.
in these weird times.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the Swiss hotline, I believe, is 143. And if you call that, then there can be therapists, there can be support people that you can talk to 24/7. That's something that's available.
Mm. Thank you so much, Carey. Is
Yeah,
there anything
you're
else that
welcome.
you'd like to share before we finish?
I guess, yeah, just if somebody does recognize that they're experiencing suicidal thoughts, please do reach out. Suicidal thoughts and depression are some of the most treatable mental health experiences that we can have. And so there's definitely resources. There's people out there like Hiba, myself, our colleagues at Lausanne Therapy Space, all of the therapists that are in our environments. There are people that are here to help and are here to support. And so if you do notice these things either in yourself or somebody that you're close to, please do reach out for support, because you're not alone, even if you are kind of stuck in an apartment by yourself. But definitely try to also go out, and do things at, again, safe physical distances from people, and try to stay socially close.
Yes.
you know, Physical distance, social
Closeness.
closeness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you
Thank you for having
for
me.
sharing all of this. I think it's such an important conversation that we don't have enough
Yeah.
in our societies. So it's good to be able to talk about it openly, because I think people struggle with this so much more than we realize, and than we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.